Before we talk about specific legislation, I want to talk just a little bit about fires. And we can't do that without talking about the federal government's involvement in our state. There's just no way to address the fire issue without acknowledging the fact that the federal government have not been wise stewards in their care of the land that should have been contractually ours as per the Enabling Act. Failed federal policy to keep the forests from having timber, take care of the tree beetles so we don't have a lot of dead tree stands, to not permit grazing. These have been some serious issues. And as I said, they own or control so much land in the state of Utah because of the failure to acknowledge the contract at statehood. Now that is an issue for another conference, and I'm sure you're aware that there's legislation going on with that. But when fires are started on federal lands, or when they involve federal lands, these fires affect all state lands. They affect the safety of our state. They affect the people of our state, the budget of our state, the air quality of our state. They affect the quality of our state, and we need to address fires. Now, not all fires start on federal lands, but all fires that are on federal lands do affect the state, and fires started on state lands that end up on federal lands also affect the state. So, having said that, there's obviously a need for intense cooperation among the various agencies of the federal government, the state, at the local, the county, the state level in dealing with these issues. And that's why we have various levels of government represented today here at the press conference. Before we talk about specific legislation, I've asked Dick Bueller, the Director of Forest Fire and State Lands, just to, as a reminder, talk a little bit about the traumas of last year's fire season. Even though there's lots of snow and it's cold time of year, the fire season is not a distant memory, and we are dealing, even as we speak, with budget issues still now that are the result of what happened during the fire season. So, Mr. Bueller.
Thank you, Senator Dayton. Let me just first say that I appreciate the opportunity to speak with you and Senator Dayton's support. We did have a rather intense fire season last year, and we ended up with about 1,528 wildland fires. It cost the taxpayers of Utah and the federal agencies about $50 million to suppress those fires. $16 million came out of state coffers for that. That includes fires on state and private land. We have about 15 million acres of state and private land that my agency has responsibility to protect, do fuel mitigation work on, and do pre-suppression work. We have a great cooperative relationship with our federal agencies and also with local firefighters and local government. And that is so critical for us to do our job well. Of the 1,528 fires, 50% of those were human caused. So we targeted last year a intense public awareness program and fire prevention program. That's critical that we continue to urge our citizens of the state to be careful with fire. We did have some fire restrictions that went into effect last year, and because of those fire restrictions and because of weather patterns that changed, our fire incident, although there were many fires, we were able to catch about 88% of those fires in initial attack, and that's our goal. Out of the 1,528 fires, 10 of those fires were large fires that many of you covered last year and we were all concerned about. We have a great need to ensure that we continue to do the necessary prevention and suppression work. Among those fires, we had some loss of life, unfortunately. One individual lost his life on the Wood Hollow fire. We had an air tanker crash and 2 pilots were killed on another fire down in southwestern Utah. So it's not just, it's a life safety issue. We're very involved in working with local government and local wildland urban interface areas to do fuel mitigation work. We try to protect the property there. This photo behind us here is a good example of where grazing occurs, and we have a fire. The fire essentially started over here on the left side where we didn't have grazing, burned to the right side, and along that fence line is where the grazing occurred, and we didn't have the fire across that line, primarily because the fine fuels were gone. Invasive species is one of the major problems. You can look at these photos here. I wanted to point this one out. This is a before and after shot of a small area that was logged at the request of a private landowner. This is a Sealy fire coming towards Clear Creek, which is just north of Schofield, or south of Schofield. This area right here in the red was logged and treated as a sound forest management practice. When the fire came down to the Sealy fire, you can see it basically hit this treated area and essentially dropped to the ground, and we were able to catch it. It essentially went out. So that's one of the examples, a couple of good examples of sound management and sound use of our natural resources.
Thank you, Mr. Bueller. And we have press packets available that have pictures in here. I just wanted us to be reminded of the cost and the efforts that we make as a state and with various government agencies in dealing with these fires. But the reason for the press conference today further is to talk about two bills dealing with these issues that are a little interesting for me to be running, because I am always a defender of the Constitution, and both of these bills have been viewed by some to push up against constitutional rights. As a result of that, I have asked Mr. Scott Sabey from the Utah State Bar to look at these. You are probably aware that the Supreme Court has mandated that the Utah State Bar be willing to give technical advice on any issues with which the legislature has concerns. And at this time, those people who favor and those opposed, both of these bills are looking at those and will be giving us some advice. But since it was read in yesterday, Senate Bill 62 deals with the governor's fire suppression authority. I'm hoping, it's my understanding that you have the entire bill in your press packet, because I wanted you to see the whole chapter of authority that the governor has in times of emergency. And what this bill is doing is authorizing the use of water sources as necessary for fire suppression. Now that's a new line, and it might sound like it's a logical, common sense concern, which I think it is, but when you talk about getting water off private property or interfering with water rights, that is a very serious issue in a state that is the second driest state in the nation, where we have such intense water issues. I know as you cover the legislation, you're aware we have a number of water bills. So that is one of the bills. The other bill is Senate Bill 120, which I had circled last week because it had been so misunderstood. And I was not sure I was going to be proceeding with that. But we have some compromise language, and I'd like to credit my House colleague, Representative Kurt Oda, for helping to work on the language. I hope you have it in front of you. But the basis of that is that it allows the state forester, now these are the important words, working with the county sheriff who is duly elected, to put some restrictions on target shooting in certain areas, and requires that every 14 days that is reviewed, thus preventing some inappropriate or unnecessary lengthy closure. I appreciate the fact that in this language, not necessary, but duly stated, it says, this does not prohibit a person from legally possessing a firearm or lawfully participating in a hunt. So it doesn't interfere with people's concealed carry rights. It just gives the state forester, working with the sheriff who is duly elected, some opportunity to work to avoid other causes of fires in certain areas during certain times of the year. That is the basis of what we wanted to present, but any one of us, any four of us, are available for answering questions.
Margaret, if I could just get you to time.
Hi, Rich.
Get you to reiterate that point, because a lot of people are very sensitive to Second Amendment rights right now. It sounds like you've taken that into consideration. How big of a challenge do you think that's going to be to sell that, if you will, to people that are concerned about that? And on the other side of it, how important do you think it is that you pursue a bill like this to address these issues that you're talking about?
Thank you. I appreciate that question. This is compromise language. And you know, a little background on this. Last year, when there were so many fires, and there seemed to be, well, there was information that some of the fires were starting by target shooters, there was concern as to whether or not a special session should be called to address this issue. Meeting with various levels of government, the various branches, it was decided that State Forester had the authority to shut certain areas down to target shooting. And the initial plan for Senate Bill 120 was just to put it into code so that that was clearly understood. In view of the very frightening proposals that come from the administration in Washington, D.C. regarding gun issues, the gun community and the pro-Constitution people are justifiably wary of any limitation on their rights. That's the reason the bill was circled last week, and we did not want to cause any undue restriction on rights or any undue frustration to those who are happily so ready and willing to protect their rights. So this compromise language, instead of giving authority to one man, the state forester, to say the land is closed without designating a period of time, now it puts an elected official in there. He will work in consultation with the sheriffs of the counties affected, the duly elected sheriff. That's one of the reasons I'm so appreciative of the presence of our sheriff here today. And as I said, I credit my colleague, Representative Oda, for working on this compromise language. It does not affect concealed carry. Matter of fact, do you want to, did I explain that adequately? Do you want to say anything about it?
I think you did great.
Are you ready? Okay. I should probably let him do that, I'm sorry.
But there's still going to be people, as you know, that just are, you know, if they want to go out and shoot targets on any given day, they may not be fully conscious themselves of what the level of fire danger is. They could just be focusing on going out and having a good time. They may not have, you know, malicious intent in mind, but yet they're still responsible. So I guess I'm just sort of interested in that balance.
Very good question, and we cannot obviously any law is not going to control all of the people all of the time. Gun owners are very responsible citizens, but there is a website, and I'm going to ask Mr. Buehler to talk about that so that people who are interested in target shooting have options and understanding to know exactly when and where they can shoot. Parenthetically, let me say there are other bills, at least one other bill I know of that's being run right now to open up more target shooting facilities, especially as you close places for shooting, you need to open more. And there are a number of private groups who are working to create more outdoor and indoor ranges so that there are more opportunities for target shooting. The goal is not to eliminate opportunities for target shooting, nor is there any intent here to restrict any gun rates or gun opportunities for lawfully permitted gun owners. Mr. Buehler, you want to talk a little bit about that website?
Certainly. Let me first say that out of the 1,528 fires, we think that 33 fires were actually started by target shooting. So it's a very small percentage. I want to make that perfectly clear. Because of that, we only closed specific areas of the state where we've had a high incidence of fires started by target shooting. Let me just say also that within the last 2 months, we've had 3 target shooting fires down in Washington County. It's an issue that again, responsible gun owners will take advantage of and do the right thing. But the website, we will create again an interactive website that has a map, has links to all the fire information like utahfireinfo.gov. We'll actually show the areas that are restricted. You can go to any of those websites and find out which areas are restricted and in fact there's restrictions that are on. We actually, the fire restriction last year covered a whole bunch of things. And finally, we ended up doing the target shooting. And quite frankly, after we did that, we didn't have any fires from target shooting. So we thank people for carrying those restrictions.
Senator Dayton said that the federal mismanagement is causing wildfires. Particularly, I guess, looking at the posters here, the feds won't let people graze or let a lot of people graze their livestock, and the feds won't let people log. Would you address that? Is it true? Do you know of instances where we've had, we can point to a fire and say that's a target shooting fire? Can we point to a fire and say that's a dumb federal government fire?
We don't call them dumb federal government fires, but we can determine how fires start. We do have a technology in doing that. Let me just say that There's two ways for a forest to be renewed. One is fire. We've taken fire out of the ecosystem and out of our tool to really do that kind of thing because of smoke management, health, air quality, so forth, and also all the people that are living in the wildland urban interface now. The other way to do forest management and create healthy forests is through logging and through manipulation mechanically. That tool has been taken away, unfortunately, from the Forest Service for various reasons, which I think some of you are aware of. So the opportunity for us to work with private landowners and on state land and engage in these sound forest practices to create healthy forests is something that we have in our toolbox right now, where the federal government has issues with that. Let me just point out over here, this map right here, if you see this fire, this was a prescribed burn we did down on the Colorado River near Moab. Now you can imagine what would happen if this occurred on an Easter weekend with this fuel and all the people camped along the river. So we try to engage in prescribed fire situations like this to protect life and property where we can, but we have that option where the federal government sometimes does not.
Okay, Mr. Bueller, in Utah Lake, on that west side of Utah Lake, it's really hard to discern what is private, what is federal, what is a state land area. Are there any efforts on like maybe fencing or signage to say this is a state area, so that way if it is closed off, people know that they can't target shoot players?
Well, first of all, that's why it's so critical to us for us to work with the counties. And last year when we closed these very few areas, we had the blessing of the county sheriff and county commissioners. We're going to continue to do that. And also the federal government. And so we're trying, if we coordinate the restrictions and closures with everyone, then there's no question. And I can tell you on the west side of Utah Lake right now, a lot of that land that is private is posted no trespassing. The BLM land is clearly marked. The school trust land is not necessarily, but if there's a blanket closure, it doesn't matter whose land you're on.
Is that the hope then with the ban, is that this will always be coordinated through all the agencies, that it'll be like a statewide, yes, this area is shut down?
That's what we like to do, and that's why we created the interactive map to show all that information to the public.
Can any of you point to fires caused by bad federal management or helped to get going by bad federal management?
Ron, that's an interesting question, the way you phrase that, because you can't say that the management caused the fire. The cause of the fire is whatever sparked the flame. It's the poor management that made it worse than it should have been.
Okay,
That's all.
What fires are those that were worse than they should have been because of poor management?
Just like up here. There you go, right there. There's a great example right there.
CD
That's
fire.
right there.
CD fire.
What? Okay. Now what you're saying? The whole thing should have been logged, and then we wouldn't have had the trouble.
No, responsible logging and proper management of the undergrowth, all the deadfall, everything else. We're not able to take a lot of that out.
Okay, but now here you got a little triangle, and that worked. And so you're saying the rest of it is it looks like very little of it was logged. I take it you're saying the whole thing should have been logged, and then we wouldn't have had such a bad fire. Is that what you're saying?
I think what we're saying is that if sound forest management practices had been engaged for many, many years, the forest would have been healthy enough and there would have been less fuel, so that fire would not have gotten as large as it did. That's what we're saying.
He's also not saying that the whole place has to be logged, Rod, managed sectionally.
Okay.
Okay, so you might lose a piece, but you're still going to save a piece.
Okay. I think it's important what Senator Dayton said, if true. But when we say, well, where specifically and what are we looking at, then you say, well, it's hard to get specifics. But now this fire, you're saying it was partly bad management.
What I'm saying is that there's lack of forest management that caused the fire to get larger than it probably would have had there been sound management. There's other fires like Church Camp, I could name that one, and probably the shingle fire are three that I can think of that were primarily on forest land and also affected private lands. And had there been good management practices on those federal lands, then they may have been less damage to the private property and less cost to the taxpayers to put those out.
Have you had cases where beetles killed the trees and the Forest Service wouldn't let them log, and so the dead trees burned?
There are numerous cases where the Forest Service has tried to do the right thing and their efforts have been challenged, and so unable to do the thing that they need to do at the time.
Okay, sounds like what you're saying is the Forest Service isn't so dumb, but the environmentalists sue them, and that's what results in, and that's what brings us bad fires.
Well, that's your take on it.
Well, what's yours?
Mine is, again, that if the Forest Service could properly manage their forest, they'd be much more healthy. We'd have less fire potential, and we'd have more healthy forests with less dying trees.
Okay, now, they ought to know what they're doing. Why aren't they managing it properly?
Again, there are roadblocks in the way for the Forest Service to do the right thing, and they understand what those are, and I think you do too as well. And that is basically challenges by groups who do not want to have those forests managed properly.
What's the penalty for, if this were to go into effect, what would be the penalty for target shooting in these areas?
It's a Class B misdemeanor, and then, of course, the individuals who start the fire could be liable for suppression costs or some part of that suppression cost based on their ability to pay. On any cause, not just any. It's not any human caused fire. Yes.
And if
not just shooting.
If this law had been in effect last year, how many days would these areas been closed?
We actually had a restriction last year for a couple of months, and what this language does this time is give us the opportunity to look about every 14 days and reassess the need for the closure.
Senator, I have a quick question on Senate Bill 62. I'm just wondering if this has been a problem in the past for the governor to use these water sources, and do other western governors have similar authority?
Let me ask Mr. Bueller to also address that, the one on the water.
If I could, the only reason that the state forester can spend money that's unappropriated is because the governor issues an emergency declaration every month during the fire season. And what this bill does is also authorizes the state forester and other organizations that are suppressing fire to use water. What we've had in the past is we've had some landowners say, "You can't use my water." So we're standing there watching the fire run over the hill and ordering more resources and running up the costs of firefighting and threat to life and property. And we've had other landowners, the vast majority, who say, "Certainly you can use my water." So what we try to do is we work out a way to compensate them for the water. If they have a legitimate water right, we will actually pay them for use of the water, or we will replace it. In some cases, where we've had a stock watering pond or a small lake that we use as a dip site for helicopters or to fill our engines, we've actually hauled water back in and replaced it. So we're not going to leave any landowner in jeopardy of not having water to water livestock or water their fields or whatever. And we work out a way to compensate them for that. The thing is, if we don't have the authority to use that water under the governor's authority, then sometimes we run up extreme cost to suppress fires and, again, increase threat to life and property.
Senator Dayton, when do you anticipate putting this amendment on the bill and running this through the Senate?
I don't think anything will happen this week. I don't think either bill, the new bill will be presented, and the amendment probably will not happen this week. So both are, we're early in the session still. We still have time to have ongoing discussion. We're just glad to have some compromise language out. Thank you all for coming. We appreciate your interest, and we realize that we work together as a state and as various agencies and as a legislature to do all we can to protect the state, the safety of the state, the quality of our lands, the quality of our life, the quality of our air. And we have limited state resources. It's always sad when we have to spend huge amounts of resources on fires that could have been avoided or minimized if we had approached them differently. And of course, the budget is one of our big issues. So thank you again for your interest. We appreciate you being here.